When Grant Brace begged his coaches for water during their first wrestling practice in 2020, they told him no, disregarding his medical exemption, which granted him extra water breaks. As he deteriorated from barely being able to stand up to lying on the ground, begging for help, saying he was gonna die, the coaches demanded that he leave, so he did. They watched and did nothing to help him. At this point, Grant is unconscious, suffering from a heat stroke. He desperately runs around the campus in search for water, trying to get some from a water fountain. Unfortunately, it wasn't working. Then trying to open a door, but it was locked. He needed help, and he never got it. He was found on all fours with fistfuls of dirt about 2 hours later, roughly 300 yards away from the empty water fountain. When they found him, it was far too late. The coach's inaction resulted in Grant suffering alone until the bitter end.
I'm right in front of Grace Crum Rollins Center. I got a student. We found passed out. I don't know what's wrong with him. In front of Grace Crum, he's not moving right now.
They did it and didn't care. They didn't care.
If this is what I'm made out to be and what I should be doing in my life right now, it's some pretty rough stuff.
This is Grant's story. Welcome back, Darkaholics. This is the dark side of life, where I will be telling you some graphic stories. We must remember that these are real tragedies with real heartbreak. With that being said, let's go. Born on December 16, 1999, to his parents Kyle and Jacqueline Brace, Grant grew up with his sister Kaylee Wagnon in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. Grant was athletic from the time he started crawling around until he was pinning people on the wrestling mats at university. And he started wrestling when he was about 5 years old, and his family had an extraordinarily tight bond, only strengthening it through their undefeatable faith in God. He was passionate and excited about going to church, eventually becoming a servant at the Sevier Heights Baptist Church he attended with family. Grant also found a love for the outdoors and activities like going to the water to jet ski, hitting the mountains to go snowboarding, or simply taking his beloved dog Titan out to hang out with him. These were just some of the things that he enjoyed doing on his free time, when he wasn't dedicating himself to achieving the next goal, and Grant Brace did not lack dedication. His father taught him a very strong work ethic and the importance of committing to the things you choose to do, and Grant took it seriously. This was proven time and time again throughout his early life, and it eventually ended up taking him to new heights. Academically, he didn't struggle at all. He was an amazing student who was well liked by both students and staff. When he started attending the Alcoa High School in Tennessee in 2015, his athletic abilities really started to shine through. Although he was overly talented and driven enough to compete in any sport, he gravitated towards wrestling and football, which he excelled in. While playing on the high school football team, he showed fearless tenacity, which was a great help to his team, who won 3 state championships with Grant, which is impressive in and of itself, but he was also a member of the National Honor Society, as well as wrestling all throughout high school, stacking up an impressive record of 128 wins and 33 losses, placing in state on 3 separate occasions. He stood out as a dominant wrestler who was well known for his abilities in competition. His high school football coach, Gary Ranklin, said that Grant was no doubt one of the sweetest boys to ever go through that school. He was a pleaser and would complete any task given to him. After his football career ended in high school, Gary knew that Grant was going to go on to have a successful life in whatever he chose to do, because that's just who he was. He was a high achiever, he never got in trouble, and he stayed focused on the goal at hand. After graduating from Alcoa, Grant accepted a scholarship to wrestle for the University of the Cumberlands, a private Christian school located in Williamsburg, Kentucky, which he couldn't be more excited about, finally taking his athletic career to the next level. Before his school year started, he would make the move down there, preparing to start this new chapter. In Grant's early life, he had been diagnosed with narcolepsy and ADHD, which he was prescribed Adderall for. He had suffered from this for a while, so he knew how to wrestle and stay athletic while taking these medications. When listening to Grant's former high school wrestling coach speak on this issue, he said that Grant would just work until he literally couldn't anymore, then he would go thoroughly rehydrate, and then he'd get after it again, leaving it all out there, and then he'd go back to the water, just repeating this cycle. Grant started his freshman year at the university just doing his thing, working really hard to accomplish what he wanted. It's difficult for me to tell you exactly what his grades were like, but there's good reason to believe he was scoring above average. Standing at 5'8", weighing in at roughly 215 pounds, he was a force to be reckoned with. He was a strong, confident dude who was not afraid to accept a challenge. 2018 to 2019 was his freshman year of wrestling with the Cumberland Patriots, working extra hard, knowing that he was going up against tougher competition. According to the university's official website, Grant went 1-4 throughout his freshman year, which I'm sure he wasn't too thrilled about, but only fueled him to work harder. He knew his ability and potential, willing to push himself until he died if he had to. Unfortunately, he would, and he somehow predicted that this may happen. The way the wrestling coaches treated the team, as some put, was borderline abusive and absolutely horrible. I think it's terrifying that Grant had a feeling that the treatment of his coaches would eventually end up hurting him.
Grant's daily blog for mom and dad, in case something bad were to happen to me. I sometimes wonder if this is what I'm made out to be and what I should be doing in my life right now. There's some pretty rough stuff.
A fall in wrestling is awarded when a wrestler pins both their opponent's shoulders on the ground for a full second. Grant tallied 2 falls during his 2019-2020 season, as well as going 3-7. But for the first time in Grant's entire life, the summer of 2020, he began questioning whether or not he wanted to continue wrestling, unsure if he was going to compete in the upcoming season, which would be his junior year. That summer, he ran into his former high school wrestling coach, Brian Gossett, who he hadn't seen in a while, and he expressed to him exactly how he was feeling. Brian knew Grant well, and he was a genuine coach who cared about Grant and his future. Listening to him and everything that he had to say, he knew that Grant would advocate for himself in any situation. So if he was feeling this way, there was thought behind it, and there was a reason. After hearing him out, he would kindly remind Grant that the most important thing is to get your degree. Basically telling Grant, look, you're the only one that knows if you want to get out there and do it, and you're the one that has to do the work. But if it's not something that you actually want to do, then you shouldn't do it. Just encouraging him to do whatever it was that he truly wanted to do, and he would have his back no matter what he chose. Although Grant wasn't sure about competing at that time, he would run into Brian a little later, give him a hug, and tell him that he decided he was going to go out for wrestling in the upcoming season, which started shortly after they ran into each other at the end of August in 2020. He had no way of knowing he wouldn't make it home from the first practice. August 31st, 2020 was the first day of practice for the team, and being this was during the height of the pandemic, the campus was fairly empty with the majority of the kids learning remotely. When the time came to start practice that day, the team showed up to the school, starting practice that afternoon indoors with some hand fighting or hand-to-hand combat and weightlifting to get them warmed up. After that, they were taken outside at roughly 3 p.m. to go to the university's track about a mile away to run sprints. Before they left, they were told by the coaches they were allowed to bring 1 water bottle, but when they got there, throw them by the fence and do not touch them. It was a sunny, warm day with the temperatures being in the mid-80s. After the team of over 40 boys hit their sprints on the tracks, they jogged as a team along the roads for a little over a mile back to the school. As soon as they got there, they went straight to what is known as Punishment Hill, and the name really speaks for itself. It's right outside the wrestling gym, measured by authorities to be approximately 200 feet in length, sitting at a 30 to 40% incline. They were to go to the bottom of the hill and then sprint all the way up it as punishment. This day allegedly because one of the teammates failed to fulfill their fundraising duties. There's a few things to keep in mind. At this point, they've been out in this weather pushing their bodies for quite some time, and they were only allowed to bring 1 water bottle. Grant, on the other hand, had a medical exemption and was excluded from any treatment like this. Because of the medication that he was on for ADHD, he was permitted extra water breaks whenever he needed them. Not only that, athletes need time for their bodies to adjust to performing in hotter conditions. It's been proven that it takes an adjustment period to safely push your body to the limits while practicing in the heat. The team does what they're told. They line up at the bottom of the hill and they start hitting their sprints up Punishment Hill. According to the police reports, for the first 7 sprints, Grant was holding his own, forcing himself to sprint up the hill until he could just no longer go on. On the 8th sprint, he would lay down on the hill and say, "I'm done, I can't do anymore." As the fatigue set in, he would throw up, and his coaches furiously start berating him, telling him he needs to get off the hill and go clean his locker, basically saying, "You're off the team." Grant would leave the hill and head to the locker room, only to return a short moment after to rejoin his team and prove that he could do it. Because again, Grant would never quit on himself and he would push through anything. So he's forcing himself back up the hill again, except the fatigue and heat exhaustion are really starting to get to him. Teammates recall hearing Grant starting to say that he can't stand, and he said it multiple times, and when they looked at him, he's very unsteady on his feet. At one point, he was off to the side, holding onto a branch, swaying back and forth, almost falling over, repeating, "Guys, please help me, I can't stand. Please help me, I can't stand." The team would then hold a short meeting on the hill, presumably to end practice that day, during which Grant is still holding onto this tree branch in order to stay upright, pleading to be helped. When the meeting concluded, the team headed inside to shower, cool off, and get some water. Grant was able to make it inside, but once he did, he just collapsed onto the mats and started begging for help again, saying, "Guys, I need some water. Please get me some water." He must have been out of it at this point because the coaches provided a cooler that was full of ice. Grant opened it and tried to get as much ice on his body as possible, splashing it all over, but it's not stated that he tried to eat any of that ice, before again collapsing to the ground and telling everybody that his pupils are uncontrollably twitching and he can't see anymore. Then that his head's about to explode and he's gonna die. After this, he started saying things that didn't even make sense, saying he was about to leave in a big parade and that he just ate a fork, obviously delirious from heat exhaustion, which any college-level coach should recognize immediately. His behavior was described as erratic, and it sounds like he lost the ability to properly communicate. One of his teammates who was concerned would grab some ice and wrap it in a towel, taking it over to Grant until he was stopped by a coach who told him no because Grant didn't perform well on the hill. Now Grant is speaking complete gibberish to the point they can't even understand him. Then suddenly he leaps up and charges his teammate, randomly tackling him to the ground. The coaches saw this happening and didn't help him, rather yelled at him and told him he needed to get out now. So completely out of it and unconscious at this point, he sprints out of the gym and not one person runs after him. He wasn't seen for another 2 hours, and when they found him, it was too late. He was seen on a security camera running around the campus in a desperate search for water. He ran to the water fountain at the school, which unfortunately wasn't working at the time. He was then seen running up to a locked door and trying with all of his might to open it up. When he couldn't, he just kicks it really hard and then takes off. If you look at the way he approached the door, he's clearly not all there and almost runs in a circle to the door as if he's drunk. He collapsed in the grass about 300 yards away from the fountain that he tried getting water from. Whoever found him tried performing CPR, but he was gone. He was on all fours, clutching the grass as hard as he possibly could, and had handfuls of dirt because of it. He suffered alone until the bitter end, and at that point he was already suffering from a heat stroke, so he couldn't think. People who are experiencing a heat stroke are most likely unconscious. Therefore, he did not have the wherewithal to save his own life. He was unconscious and needed help. It's important to remember that because it would be the coach's job to spot it, as well as uphold his medical exemption, allowing him water whenever he needed it. Yet they failed him miserably, and he suffered a horrifying death because of it. At what point did he go unconscious? It's hard to say, but what's certain is these coaches fucked up, and he should have never died due to an exertional heat stroke, which was undoubtedly avoidable and should have been avoided by these coaches and trainers. He runs out of the gym after begging for water, quickly losing the ability to make sense with his words and saying he ate a fork, and not one person ran after him to see how he was doing. And they most likely know Grant, and that Grant will push past any normal pain and discomfort. How did the coaches not see that he was desperate for help? His family knew this wasn't right. They knew their son well enough to know he was smart and wouldn't put himself in danger, but he was determined enough to push himself too far, which no athletic coach should ever let happen. When I first covered this story, the lawsuit between the family and the university was still ongoing, but recently came to an end, with the Brace family being awarded more than $14 million for his wrongful death, along with the university agreeing to participate in a training program and awareness campaign regarding the prevention of heat-related illnesses. The Brace family was never after money in this situation, and they made that clear. This was about the school being held accountable for what happened to their loving son. $14,121,699 was the exact number they settled for. The family did want this to be known, so other schools are aware of the damage caused when you ignore heat-related illnesses. They should have never lost their son in such a preventable way when all he needed was help. That's it. The University of the Cumberlands would release a statement saying, quote, "We sincerely hope that resolving this matter early in the legal process will offer the Brace family a measure of peace and healing. The wrestling coaches involved in this, who are still being investigated criminally, are Jordan Countryman and Jake Sinkovics, along with others. The lawsuit alleges they created a really toxic environment, an atmosphere of fear and intimidation, as they put it, which was created by all of the emotional manipulation and physical and emotional abuse, which made it a terrible and scary experience, which is probably why Grant had a feeling that something bad was going to happen to him. They apparently ridiculed Grant for thinking he was special, needing extra water breaks, and would not give him one. It stated they would yell out things like "water is for the weak" when Grant was around, just being assholes for no reason. With this information coming out, it's far more infuriating since these fuckers probably thought it was funny to withhold water and not give him his extra water breaks, and it's just sickening.
You know, one thing with toughness, and this is what we really challenged our guys to do this year, is to edit their lifestyles. It's one thing to be tough in the wrestling room, but we really want them to be tough in all phases of their lives.
Hey Coach, I just ran out of some face moisturizer. Do you have any?
Could we please use some? I'm sorry, I think all I have is my purifying charcoal face mask.
Hey, you know what? Actually, I do have some. It's in my locker right next to my blow dryer. Oh, okay. Yeah, I got you. Sweet.
Those two guys, they bought in. They're tough.
Tough as nails.
The school would go on to say that they probably could have defended themselves in court. However, that process would have been, quote, long, difficult, and costly. It's my understanding there are still criminal investigations underway, just the civil side of it is done. I hope there are more repercussions for the loss of such a bright, loving student in their care. His story is painful and unacceptable. His teammates must be so hurt over this situation. It's stated that some of them were even verbally abusive towards Grant during the sprints. But for the ones that weren't and actually cared about Grant, this would be devastating. To have your coaches deprive a good friend, good teammate his water until ultimately it killed him would be traumatizing. Even more so if you tried to help him and they stopped you. On the morning of August 31st, 2020, the day he passed away, he went over to his motivational whiteboard where he would write down his daily motivational quote. And he wrote down, "Tough times don't last, but tough people do." Those were his words of encouragement to himself on that fateful day. He was truly a strong-minded individual who was not afraid to accept a challenge. In fact, he sought after challenging himself and pushing himself to the next level. He was so kind to absolutely everyone. He had a warm heart, and his loyalty was something that never wavered. The sky was the limit for him, and he proved he had the determination to get what he wanted in life. His family will never be the same again after losing him. They will never get to see him wrestle again or get another phone call with updates on how his schooling is going. Instead, they have to remember him for the amazing person he was. They miss him more and more as the days go by, and it never gets easier. He was laid to rest September 6, 2020. And still, the undisputed champion. Rest easy, Grant Brace.
I'm waiting on a heartache to prove I'm alive. I'm waiting
Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. If you made it to the end, go down to the comment section and comment "still a champion" so I know. And if you want to, you can follow me on Instagram at Robert Clausen with 2 N's. If you have a story suggestion, DM me on there. I think that's all I have for you guys today. Again, I truly appreciate your support. Until the next video. Peace.